There is an implication that there is some need to coerce those people to work. If you think like, oh, people don't want to work, then, there is some kind of natural implication there of like, well, people don't want to work, so we have to try to make them. Do you want to live in a society like that? Or would you rather live in a society where people who don't want to work aren't made to, and people who do want to work can contribute freely to their society, right? I just kind of realized sometime in the last year or so that I am just rapidly becoming an anarchist. Like, I didn't really realize that that's what was happening to me. But as the ideas sink in and you're like, why is this happening? And why is this happening? And why is that? And this, like, you start to realize like, oh, like the state exists to like in its fundamental function. One of the things that it does is draw all the violence in toward itself and say, you're not allowed to commit violence. We have the monopoly on violence. We can do what we want violently, and there's nothing you can really do to stop it, and you just start thinking about these things more and more, and you evolve in your thinking, and you're like, wow, landlords are bad, and like capitalism is bad, and the state kind of upholds capitalism by reinforcing the laws about landlords. What a fucked up thing to happen, you just kind of continue going on and on and on forever and ever. We're not talking about bathrooms and Caitlin. We'll get there, okay? I've got like 7 topics today. We'll get there. I have like 7 things on the docket, and I have like at least a dozen links that we need to look at today. So much to do. Bailing out big corporations too. Yeah. Like a big part of what the police do is reinforcing property rights, like going after people for theft, like including going after people for theft when they stole from a gigantic corporation like Walmart, like all these things. So I just kind of have gradually realized that, oh boy, I am maybe a bit of an anarchist. And with that comes a lot of questions. Like, you have to answer a lot of logistical questions, right? Like, like in the absence of a government, how do you deal with, I don't know, schooling as just fucking one given issue? Like, how do you figure it out? And I have found it frustrating as I've watched these conversations bear out. Like, if you remember the big fight that like Vosh had with Demon Mama, and there was all this conversation happening around some tweets about supply chain, and like I think it was actually ultimately tweets that Doe had posted initially, and they got everybody talking about like, oh my god, these anarchists, they want to like make medicine in the bathtub and they don't care about supply chain. Yeah, the supply chain discourse. Yes, the bathtub estrogen discourse. You all remember this. There are a lot of like logistical questions. So you found out that you're an anarchist, a book that Docord regularly should be writing. I'm not a member of Docord. Maybe I should be. Right. Like that conversation between them was pretty toxic, and there was a lot going into it. And it's made me more interested in these sort of ongoing conversations about how do you deal with all these things in the absence of like the existing structures. Like, can we take the existing structures and mold them, whatever, What are incentives as well to do things in a society where things are being distributed in a more even way? Where like people are always like, oh my god, like why would anyone like be a garbage man in a society where everybody gets universal basic income, or like nobody technically has income because money doesn't exist anymore? Like, why would people do hard jobs if there's not a financial incentive is the fundamental question. Absolutely. Docord is so intimidating. How do you get into Docord? Where's the link? I don't know where it is. I don't know how to get into Docord, but if you want to get into the Luxander's Lair Discord, hit the link down below or up here, depending. Are you on the website or down here if you're on YouTube? Do it. I've done hard things because they were personally fulfilling. Yeah, there are a number of reasons to do difficult things, right? But the idea is like, you know, if it's not for your personal fulfillment, like it's not like you go become a trash man for personal fulfillment for most people. It's not like, oh my God, like I love the job of being a trash man. Oh my God, like I feel so personally fulfilled and I love the person that I have to be in order to do that difficult job. Like, you know, why would you do that? These are some interesting and genuine questions. Most people don't treat it like it's an interesting and genuine question. Most people treat it like, oh my God, I'm going to use this as a gotcha. Like, haha, here's why your ideology doesn't work. Or like, I demand that you have literally all the answers. And like, come up right now with like from the ground up a functioning system, even though the system that we currently have is like built on hundreds of years of systems, you know, like as though you could independently come up with those systems today in the absence of any other feedback. Anyway, so on that note, I saw this post coming out, you know, someone retweeted it, someone quote tweeted it, deciding to take a look at some anarchist explainer online. Hold on, yes. And no, it was exactly what I thought. Like, these people aren't surviving the first winter. Okay, what is he criticizing here? Okay, what is being said? Who will take out the trash? This is, I believe, some kind of anarchist opining on a potential future. If everyone is free to work as they choose, who would take out the trash or perform other undesirable jobs? Fortunately, in a localized anti-capitalist economy, we could not externalize or hide the costs of our lifestyle by paying someone else to clean up after us, in the way that currently, like, there's kind of an underclass of people whose job it is to just take our trash away without us, like, really knowing what happens to it after that. We would have to pay for the consequences of all our own actions, rather than paying China to take our toxic waste, for example. If a necessary service like garbage disposal were being neglected, the community would quickly notice and have to decide how to handle the problem. People could agree to reward such work with small perks, nothing that really translates into power or authority, but something like getting to be the first in line when exotic goods come into town, receiving a massage or a cake, or simply the recognition and gratitude for being a stand-up member of the community. And this person continues, like, if a necessary service was being neglected, people would just deal with it. Wow, I'm so glad to know that would happen by itself. What a serious ideology. Like, yeah, man, you're like listening to this with the intent of making fun of it. Why be fash when you could be fesh? Reminds me of who does the dishes after the revolution. Yeah, I mean, like, I personally think that there are, like, I mean, obviously, if you live in a community where you don't have a government to take care of trash, like if you're in a situation where garbage disposal is not happening regularly enough and you don't have a structure like the government to kind of like offload onto, like, it's a little bit of a bystander effect thing, right? Where, like, maybe if we didn't have the structures in place that are supposed to take care of trash now, we would probably come up with some local solutions. You know, we would probably come up with some kind of means by which to keep our communities clean. You know, we want to be able to walk on the street without having a bunch of trash around, generally. Like, that's something that we want as a community. It's easier to take action and care about those things, really, if there isn't some idea in your head like, oh, that's someone else's job. Like, if there's trash on the street, like if you're walking on the sidewalk and there's trash on the curb, like in the street, you might think like, oh, you know, whatever, I'm not going to pick up that trash. Like, even if it's, let's say it's explicitly dangerous trash, like it's, you know, the plastic rings for a 6-pack of beer or something. You might be like, oh, you know, they come by with the street sweeper machine every once in a while, you know, that's fine, whatever. Like, it's easy for you to neglect your personal responsibility. Do you know what I mean? But it's not like there aren't, you know, it's not like there aren't perks besides like the ones that are explicitly being outlined here. Like, it's kind of strange, the idea of receiving a massage in exchange for doing some difficult job like garbage disposal. Like, that, I think, introduces an element where it feels like, oh, so you are going to reward this person's labor by conscripting this other person's labor. Like, it's just, I don't know, like, that's not really the case, but it just sounds like that. I don't have all the answers for anarchy, but I still like the idea. Right, like, this is the beginning of a conversation. This is a beginning of a dialogue about potential ideas of things that we could do. I wish that people would entertain it as that. Like, I would like to start a conversation about some kind of alternative to the way that we're doing things now. And instead of being like, I demand that you just have the entire answer, like, I want people to see it as an opportunity to discuss. But, like, even without the idea of actual rewards, like, there is a possibility that being allowed to be the first in line when exotic goods come into town could lead to some kind of hierarchical situation where that person ends up like with a lot of exotic goods, right? And that, you know, that could just introduce an element of unwanted market dynamics potentially. But a lot of the shit that happens within our communities, like we benefit from directly because we live in our communities. Someone was complaining in the replies to this, like, oh yeah, they said, I love filling in a pothole on the road into town so that I can receive a cake. Like at my last place that I lived, I was seriously considering buying or like going door to door on the street and like raising the money to buy like a nice 5-gallon bucket of like road fixing asphalt, because the road, like the little tiny back road, side road that I lived on was fucked up. And I wanted to be able to drive on the road. And I was like, this is basically like I want to do an anarchism right now. Like what I want to do is go door to door and say, here's a problem in our community. Can you contribute? Like a little bit of money, just like we need to raise a little bit of money so that we can afford this object that we all need together. And then I would be willing to do the labor, like, because I want the road to be drivable. I want my car to not incur additional damages that I will then have to pay for, right? You benefit when your roads are not filled with trash. Like when you have a central trash system, or even a like, you know, my question is, where is all the trash going? Is it going to be burned up in the atmosphere? Turn the trash into asphalt tar. True. Doing the labor because it improves your life and the lives of others near you. Imagine. There are definitely more ways to improve and to benefit than just monetary reasons. Better argument. Anyone who takes out the trash becomes king for the day. No power, but a neat crown and the ability to get the bartender's attention quite easily. That's totally fair, right? And yeah, when it comes to like something like taking out the trash, like, you know, do you not take out the trash in your own home? Do you not do the dishes in your own home? Like labor needs to be done, so it's done. And when you live in a community, labor needs to be done within the community. So labor just gets done within the community. Like I truly do think that if we had less reliance on centralized systems, we would come up with individual solutions. Because if you have trash around the community, then you get rats, and rats bring disease. And there's also going to be like more cats around and more dogs around and like more snakes around who want to eat the fucking rats. Potentially a lot of health issues. There's a reason why we structure society in the way that we do currently. And that is because, like, if you don't have central sewage systems, then you have fucking E. coli outbreaks all over the place, right? Hot question. Do we need roads under anarchism? Will we need cars to get to where we need to go? Is that helpful as it is currently? I don't think you can completely phase out cars, because, you know, like I, for example, like I consider myself at this point high risk for COVID. I'm going to always prefer to take my car or walk or maybe ride a bike or something. Like if I had a little moped, that might be something that's preferable. Like maybe if we had more mopeds, which are still motorized, fewer cars, like an alternative to public transit, because I don't want to do public transit. For sure, I don't want to do public transit. Travel needs to be allowed, but the amount of cars people have right now is crazy excessive. I agree with that. I for sure agree with that. We probably can't build train tracks everywhere. You know, we can do more buses and trains, but we still are going to need cars, I think. Yeah, Slaps Hungry Bears says, it sounds like people are just scoffing at the idea that, I don't know, the community would find a solution to the problem by, like, I don't know, discussing it. This is what I'm saying. Like, people who are opposed to anarchism also seem really violently opposed to genuine dialogue, where we actually try to discuss ideas and come up with solutions, and not even just come up with, like, even just the discussing of ideas. Like, I think it would be really cool if we did this. And someone's like, oh, what if we did this? Or like, oh, what if we did this in order to do that thing you just said? You know, if you spend 5 minutes just talking about possibilities, instead of just immediately trying to launch to a solution, because usually when you launch to a solution, you end up like, it's like an ad hoc argument almost. Like you jump to the conclusion of, we need to have a stateless society, and then you come up with all this bullshit to like get us there, when in reality we need to be doing all the incremental bullshit first. We had rail from sea to sea in like 1900. I think our rail lines did used to be a little bit more robust, because we didn't used to have cars. You needed to have trains in order to get shit places, right? And now mostly the trains are more for like transit of goods rather than transit of people. We cannot build rail lines to everywhere, but we can pack everything more densely together and build more streets. I don't know if I feel that things need to be made more dense. I don't know. I mean, I guess like, I'm from Kansas City originally. Like, Kansas City is a pretty fucking sprawling mess. It would probably be a lot easier to navigate if it were a little bit more dense, like a little bit more just okay. Have you been to Kansas City, Baphomet? Because yeah, it's oh god, you get to a point with these, you get a big city like Kansas City, right? And then you've got like, you know, Roland Park and fucking Mission, Kansas, and fucking whatever. And then like Kansas City itself gets like bigger and bigger. And then basically this entire area is Kansas City technically. But like as far as the USPS is concerned, like this is still Roland Park. This is still Mission, Kansas. Like, but technically it's all Kansas City because it's all fucking bleeding together. Andy says, I have a strange feeling that there will be a huge decrease in labor from those that don't feel like doing it, as in more bums and society could fall apart. Just a theory, a life theory. That doesn't bear out in the studies. We've done studies on what do people do when they're provided with a universal basic income. Universal basic income just being like, they write you a check for $1,500 a month. And that's not very much money, but it is enough to pay your rent and to buy you a little bit of food or whatever, depending on where you live, right? When people are given a universal basic income, they do usually still work. They might temporarily stop working, but they generally do go back to work. However, here's the thing. They only work for about 25 hours a week because people want to be working. They want to be contributing. They want to be doing something. They want to be speaking to people. They want to be a part of society. However, they don't want to feel like they're required to, or that they're stuck in their job because they can't find any other work. They don't have any options. When you provide a universal basic income, you give people a little bit of power to say, listen, if this job doesn't treat me right, I'm going to be eating rice and beans for a month or two while I look for another job, but I can just leave this job and I have income and my rent is going to be paid. Okay. Yeah. And there is an implication that there is some need to coerce those people to work. If you think like, oh, people don't want to work, then, you know, there is some kind of natural implication there of like, well, people don't want to work, so we have to try to make them. Do you want to live in a society like that? Or would you rather live in a society where people who don't want to work aren't made to, and people who do want to work can contribute freely to their society, right? The same powers that give us plumbing and transportation and waste disposal are the same powers that facilitate the violence and injustices committed by the state. I mean, basically, if you think about it, even like the plumbing and transportation and waste disposal, like all of those things are also means by which the state can levy power against people. If you look at situations like, I don't know that it's being done to levy power specifically, but the Flint, Michigan water situation, they still don't have clean water. And you have to think like there's a lot of black people who live in Flint, Michigan, like the infrastructure wasn't prioritized for probably racial and class reasons, you know, and the state refusing to fix those things is a kind of violence being like passively perpetrated against the members of that community on a daily basis at this point, for years at this point, like half a decade, more than half a decade now, something crazy. I'd love some UBI right now as I hunt for a new job. At the moment, I'm jobless and anxious. Yeah, it makes you so anxious. If we had UBI, like I would be, boy howdy, like I make like just enough money each month. Thank you all for your generosity in order to like stay solid. I'm going to be able to afford to live in my own place, which is a huge deal to me. If I had a universal basic income, at least I would be like, I can breathe a little bit. Like I wouldn't feel like, oh my God, I'm not getting enough editing done. I'm not getting enough of this done. I need to do more of this and blah, blah, blah. Like there is a pressure, you know, like, do I need to get a job through the winter, like a seasonal job? Like, I don't, back to the questions of like, what kind of job am I willing to do for someone else when I have now had the sweet taste of self-employment for the last 6 months? I'm a professionally unemployed deadbeat and I find myself wanting to do at least some sort of labor. Right. Like, even if it's not something that's like really super helpful to society, like taking the trash, like even if the labor that you want to do is like writing a book, you know, that's still something that's going to benefit someone. Someone is going to be like, wow, I loved this book. Like it really gave me something to think about. I really like enjoyed that. I really want to do something with my time, either learn or do small bits of working, but because of my income situation, I feel or I have like no flexibility, and that lack of flexibility keeps me from even trying anything new. How many people are just like, I'm never going to be able to try this new hobby that I want to do, even though it only costs $20 to start off with, because I don't have $20 to get a book and like the pencils to draw. And I don't have the energy and the time after my 60-hour work week to do anything for my personal enjoyment. It's also about changing the perception of work and how we've framed certain jobs. We think of the amount of money we earn. However, could there be another benefit that isn't offered by money? That's the ultimate question, really. Slaps Hungry Bear says, I don't know if I call myself an anarchist because I do see some problems, but I do agree with anarchists more than tankies or even sock dems. I think that like I think you can be an anarchist in the sense of like, I believe that a less structured, stateless society would be better, without that necessarily meaning like I commit to the idea that we should destroy the state immediately. To me, it's a philosophical position where I recognize that like a state doesn't necessarily exist for the good of people. It exists for its own perpetuation. Like if the state were open to radical bottom-up change in order to be more in line with the needs of the people, then that would be great. But the state resists changes that make it better for the people, because ultimately, like the bureaucracy involved with the creation and continuation of the state is partially designed for its own ongoing life, its own perpetuation. And in that way, the state is kind of opposed to the needs of people. And that's where we run into issues, where we need to start figuring out like maybe some alternatives to this concept of a state, you know? I'm cool with anarchists. I just don't know how to be anything but a person trying to function within the immediate world around me, right now at least. I don't know how to be that. Like, you know, it's like being a gender abolitionist. You're like, this is not realistically going to happen within our lifetimes. It just is like a nice idea. It would be cool if someday what can we do now to kind of guide us generally toward that, even though I will be long dead before we get there, right? Like, we're not going to live in an anarchist society. Not going to happen. But we can discuss it and be like, this is philosophically where our principles are, right? Because ultimately for me, the anarchism is about the principles. But yeah, that's me being like, oh shit. So for a long time I was like, I don't know if I really qualify as a leftist because I feel so like hesitant to delve into these issues, and like I don't really know what my opinion is on a lot of things. And like, oh no, I'm an anarchist now. Before humans could make it work, I think we'd have to pretty much grow out of our current religious paradigms. I don't know that the idea of religion itself needs to be gotten rid of, but like certainly a lot of our religious institutions do enforce. It's weird because they purport to, Christianity in particular purports to stand for communalism, but then in reality reinforces a lot of individualism. There's this concept of building the new world in the shell of the old. I mean, you will always have to construct your new world out of the remnants of what existed before. Even if all of the actual infrastructure gets destroyed, you're still going to have a bunch of people with a lot of mindsets that are going to need to be evolved through, right? So anyway, yeah, I just wanted to talk about this a little bit because I've been really thinking about this concept of like who does what in the anarchist society. Like, am I like a freak? Like sometimes I feel like I'm a freak a little bit for being like, I just think that work needs to be done. Like I clean the toilets in my apartment for both me and the other person who lives here. Like I do most of the dishes for both of us. Like you just do shit because it needs to be done, and you don't like piss and bitch and moan about it. If you feel like things are inequitable, have a discussion, sure. But as far as, oh my God, like who's going to do this? Like the only reason that you have this like, oh my God, who's going to do this attitude is because we live in a society currently where that kind of unpleasant labor is made invisible. It's erased by the fact that you can just make poor people do it. Cool. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to all of my patrons for supporting this work that I do. I appreciate every single one of you, but I want to especially shout out Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvag, Jovian F. Gaudreau,
Amanda B., Heather Clarkson, Michelle Winter, R. Halverson, Athiette, Sarah A., Wellington Marcus, Nova, Mr. Atheist, Elizabeth Bartell, Suzanne Maynard, Sojo, and Bean.